Now that we know that Tartaglia will be the up-and-coming rerun banner, the world has yet again presented that one important question in a gacha game. Should you pull for Tartaglia? And in this video, I'll explain to you why you absolutely should not pull for Tartaglia. But before I start, keep this in mind. If you like his design and has no qualms about whether or not a character is helpful to your account growth, then absolutely go ahead and pull for him. I saw a lot of negative remarks on videos such as these, but I hope I make it absolutely clear that this video is to explain some disadvantages with Tartaglia for the people who are on a neutral standpoint regarding Tartaglia, so they get to come up with their own decision. If you're already sure that you're going to pull for him because you like him, well, don't take this video as something offensive to your decision. I respect your choice, it's alright, and I hope you respect my opinion as well. And also, hold your salt shakers, this is my own opinion that I got from my own experience of using Tartaglia, and you can absolutely disagree, but try and keep things civil, okay? Now then, let's finally start. I'll be giving you 3 reasons as to why you should not pull for Tartaglia, and let's start with the first one, which is basically Tartaglia's elemental skill. If you don't know, Tartaglia's elemental skill allows him to be a literal badass and slash enemies a bunch. I won't explain too much about Tartaglia's kit in this video, perhaps I'll explain that in a guide in the future maybe. But Tartaglia's skill mainly allows him to do well against clumped up enemies. If he hits one enemy with his mark thingy, he'll trigger another AoE explosion that hurts the target and those around him. And that AoE explosion can be further triggered if the explosion itself hits opponents that also has this mark. His damage will be unmatched if the opponents are, say, a group of hilichurls or just a group of enemies that just clumps up together. Because Tartaglia can constantly burst them down with a barrage of attacks that procs even more attacks with each attack. The one fatal flaw with this is that in almost any parts of the game right now, there are very little situations where the enemies will gather themselves up. Be it in Archon quests, world bosses, world exploration, or just Spiral Abyss, almost any enemies you're encountering are designed to be individual mini-bosses that does not just clump up easily. If you're thinking of using Venti, sadly, Mihoyo has gave our God of Freedom a big slap in the face and made a lot of enemies almost immune or completely immune to his burst. And honestly, even if he could gather any enemies up, Tartaglia's E will cause him to miss a majority of his attacks if the enemies are clumped up with Venti's burst, since they'd be sort of floating midair. So pretty much, Tartaglia's usage will be very little, since, well, the situation that allows him to shine and become the best at something does not happen too much currently. So that's reason number 1. Now let's move on to the second reason, which is Tartaglia's lengthy cooldown. Tartaglia's kit and stats are absolutely that of a main damage dealer. However, the game has the mechanic of elemental reactions, which allows players to reach a very high number of damage by utilizing this mechanic. So you're not meant to just stay in with Tartaglia and have him deal damage alone. You're meant to have more elements and trigger some elemental reactions like Vaporize or Melt that could give you 1.5 times or even double your damage as a whole. So basically, it is wiser to utilize elemental reactions while you do damage with your DPS, which is basically the essence of the entire game itself, playing with the elements. However, Tartaglia's elemental skill has a very troublesome mechanic. So you see, when you activate his elemental skill and then you end it, you'll see that your cooldown is the duration of his skill plus an extra 6 seconds. So if you use this skill for 10 seconds, you end up with 16 seconds of cooldown after you switch him out, or just end the elemental skill on your own by hitting E. Now this causes a dilemma where you have to switch him out to apply other elements so Tartaglia can trigger more elemental reactions and do more damage. But then again, you'll have to potentially wait for his cooldown that is also lengthened by an extra 6 seconds to end. During the time where he does not have his elemental skill, his damage will be a lot lesser since he'd be left with his charged bow shot. To put things to perspective, the Luke, which has short skill duration but short cooldown, can be switched out quite often for other characters to apply more elements. And then you can switch him back and you'd probably just have to wait for a short 1 second before you get to use your skills again and trigger some Vaporize or Melt. That is the main issue with Tartaglia's mechanic, that adds an extra 6 seconds of cooldown. You will oftentimes find yourself shooting with Tartaglia's bow or stuck with the likes of Bennett or Xingqiu after they've done their skill, just to wait for Tartaglia's elemental skill cooldown to end. And if you just stay on the field with Tartaglia for too long, it will also be very unwise, since you not do as much damage, and you'll probably be dealing with a 36 seconds cooldown after using his elemental skill for 30 seconds. That means for the next 36 seconds, your damage source will have to come from support characters. Now in an Abyss setting, this will mean you'll be wasting a lot of time doing little to no damage, since the enemies in Spiral Abyss are really tanky. Now there is a very simple solution for this, is to simply just have another DPS in your team, which does mean you'll have to build an extra DPS and put both in the same team, just so you can fill in the periods where Tartaglia can't use his elemental skill. But regardless of it, if you do add another DPS into the team with Tartaglia, it absolutely works. The only troublesome part is that you'll have to build 2 DPS for a team to work. And guess what? Just to put this out there, the best DPS to use alongside Tartaglia is actually Hu Tao, which is also coming, as you know. And just to add, Tartaglia can only use this incredibly strong elemental burst if he has activated his elemental skill. So if you're stuck with, say, 16 seconds of cooldown, you'll be stuck with using the weaker version of the burst, which uses his bow. Or you'll be stuck having to save up your bursts, that directly means less damage over time. Overall, you'll find it pretty tricky to manage and handle its cooldown duration as compared to a lot of other DPSs with shorter cooldown, especially in a battle scenario where you're likely forced to switch to certain characters sometimes. Now, it's not as if Tartaglia cannot be used, it's just that you'll have to always keep in mind about his cooldown. And one mistake would cause you to have about a few seconds extra time where you're not going to be doing damage to Tartaglia at all. And finally, you should not be pulling Tartaglia because Hu Tao. Yep, this coffin-selling, Shinigami-resembling, probably psychotic business girl is one of the highest damage dealers you can get in the game, where her damage shines especially from her elemental skill. She also boasts one of the highest survivability amongst any characters in the game, since her kit allows her to be built with high HP, and she can also heal a lot with her burst as well. Hu Tao can dish out incredible damage during her elemental skill duration, especially against individual enemies, which is perfect for the state of the game right now, since even some mobs are as hard-hitting and tanky as some mini-bosses. Her skill duration goes for about 8 to 9 seconds, with the cooldown being about 7 seconds, which is just perfect for her to do damage with some elemental reactions and be switched out right away to prepare for the next DPS cycle. You'll probably see yourself having less than a second of cooldown with Hu Tao after switching her out and setting things up and bringing her back in. This means she's one of the easier DPS to use, since you won't have to control and manage your cooldown too much. It's just, if you have the skill, you use it. If you are out of your skill, you switch things out and set things up again. And then when you switch her back in, she would be ready for the next cycle already. As I mentioned earlier, she's also very good against individual enemies. That means most late game bosses and later Abyss stages, where the hardest ones are the ones with just a singular boss as the enemy. This means you'll be using her a lot as you play more of the game. Then again, it's not that she can't work against clumped up enemies or separated enemies, but you just miss some attacks if you don't aim well enough though. Comparatively, it is a lot easier to use Hu Tao than Tartaglia, where you don't have to worry about the cooldown management as much, which is why I recommend skipping Tartaglia for Hu Tao if you're looking for a reliable DPS that is very simple to use. And those are 3 reasons why you should not pull for Tartaglia. This video could be considered as a hot take, but I hope we keep things civil and share our opinions without toxicity. I made this video referencing to my own experience with Tartaglia and Hu Tao, which should have some truth to it, since I'm also just an average Genshin player, right? And yeah, let me know what you think in the comments down below. Take care.